It is a game day at Climate Pledge Arena. The Florida Panthers coming into town. That means the Kraken have to get ready for the champs. We have a squadcast or crossover episode to talk about it all before the puck drops tonight.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken and Locked On Florida Panthers a part of your daily destination. Of course, we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken, joined by my bro from Florida, Armando Velez, your host of Locked On Florida Panthers. Armando, how are you?
Very well, Hermano, and you show off the hat a little bit for the audience here, for everyone here in South Florida for the Amerigo LatAm Cup that you like to come down here for every single year to cover hockey internationally, and also this also happens to be on the 32-year anniversary of the NHL announcing that South Florida will get a hockey team, and then the Panthers, crazy enough how they took 10 months to put it all together to finally get a game on the ice, and now coming into this, Stanley Cup champions.
Wow, a wild story indeed. So many just great stories from Florida. And yes, the Amerigo LatAm Cup, the Florida Panthers, of course, are hosts of that, including using their new practice facility in the most recent Amerigo LatAm Cup. So it's always a pleasure and an honor to be a play-by-play broadcaster for those games, and hope to do it again. But today we got to take care of some business. Yes. Armando, I see you've got your background set to the Emerald City because your squad is taking on my squad tonight at Climate Pledge Arena. Before we get into all of that, we do want to let you know today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And where I want to get started is we've already alluded to it. Our off season's very different, and arguably your team had the best off. Not even arguably, your team had the best off season, coming off of a Stanley Cup championship. Take us through what the celebration was. I know we talked a little bit about that, but now where is the team through almost 30 games in the season, coming off that championship?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because if you were to put this team and look at it and zoom out a little bit, you think for the Panthers that it's just a normal season for them. I mean, for them coming off that championship and celebrating all summer, they went back to work very quickly for them, and it really started with the banner raising on opening night. How quickly they got out. Put their arms over each other's shoulder, lifted up the banner, and then just got straight to playing hockey for them. Mm-hmm. And this Panthers team went through a fair share of injuries through a 6 to 8 game stretch for them. But a lot of players have stepped up in a Sam Bennett and Anton Lundell all there. And, of course, bringing new pieces, which they lost a little bit in, one of them being Brandon Montour to the Seattle Kraken. That's still a place that the Panthers are still trying to figure out for their power play, as right now Aaron Ekblad is taking the top power play spot, playing like maybe around like the high 20s is as far as minutes every night for them. So the Panthers, they're still trying to figure things out on as far as their units, but that part of their game is working out pretty well. But really the turnaround for the Panthers as far as play, even though they lead the Atlantic Division, has really been 5-on-5 play for them. But thankfully for the Panthers right now, Sergei Bobrovsky is back after getting a new baby girl. Well, now his second daughter for him, and he was just a few minutes away from a shutout. But Spencer Knight has also developed well for the Panthers, even though he had 2 games of 5, letting in 5 goals in each of them. He got one of them in a win, 3 points out of 4 in a Pennsylvania trip, and then 2 of the games before that for Spencer. The least of the Panthers' issues when it came to losing the game with their inability to score. But recently for the Panthers, they're just riding along the wave of Matthew Tkachuk, averaging 3 points a game in his last 5 for them. So it's really when one thing happens for the Panthers, another person steps up, and that's really what's been the story of the season as the Panthers try to repeat. And I want to turn it back to you on just the state of the franchise. I mean, big additions for the Seattle Kraken: Brandon Montour, Chandler Stevenson, 2 Stanley Cup champions, Dan Bylsma, who was a Stanley Cup champion in 2009 with the Penguins, bringing in Jessica Campbell from his crew in Coachella Valley, who they actually caught the Nashville Predators on a incorrect lineup that got them a power play. I want to talk about that. So that was pretty cool story when I first heard about that. So talk about that for my audience.
Yeah, well, Dan Bylsma was he talked about that after that game. I mean, it's a Preds game. We had just spoke with Ann Kimmel in another Squadcast right before then, and she was like, by any means necessary, stay 5-on-5. And then seconds into the game, we get a power play. Now, we'll talk about the Kraken power play a little bit later on this episode, but, what Dan was saying is that they knew what they were looking for as far as Nashville and their top line, and you take a look at the lineup that is submitted, and it just, you're like, wait a minute, that's not what we planned for. So let's just inquire. It's one of those things that in sports, I know some people, especially if it happens against your team, you're like, oh, that's like soft. Like, why would you call that in? But hey, if it works in your team's favor, why not? And again, we'll talk about the Kraken power play, but at that point in time, even at that point in time in the season, and playing against Nashville, no guarantees the Seattle Kraken are going to score on a power play. But I mean, rules are rules for a reason. Kraken did go on to win that game. They didn't score on that power play though, but
but still a Kraken team that year. I spoke about this a few days ago about how whenever teams go scorched earth rebuilds, is like, be careful what you wish for. And I know for the Kraken, there's, they were starting off just trying to build the team, and just not a lot of players are left from the expansion draft. There's a few bright spots. I know Jordan Eberle's currently on IR for the Seattle Kraken.
Yeah.
But also what I think is something that's very beneficial for bringing Dan Bylsma in is the fact that even though Shane Wright is a 4th overall pick, they sent him back to the OHL for a season. Yep. Got him some Calder Cup playoff experience last year with Dan Bylsma. Yep. And I think that bringing him in and now actually getting a full season under his belt. I mean, we saw this with Mackie Semskevich for the Panthers last year, and him getting that full season there, and even Spencer Knight last year. How beneficial has that been for Shane Wright coming into this year?
Yeah, first of all, shout out to Semskevich. I covered his sister Melissa a lot in women's hockey, so I love that you brought that up. But to your point about Shane Wright, I think it's a great time to bring this up, because the right line has been our best line in the last handful of games. And that started from, or I should say it was coming out of 3 consecutive games where Dan Bylsma opted to have Shane Wright as the odd forward out. He had been a healthy scratch. And Dan Bylsma, I love that he is not afraid to do that, including with some veterans like Oliver Bjorkstrand, who I'm sure we'll talk about, who's on the Shane Wright line now. But, for Bylsma, it was all about a reset. Shane Wright, and we talked about this a lot on Locked On Kraken, he looked determined. He was focused, energetic, but still energetic and fun, but very focused. He wanted to make this NHL roster coming in, and he played that way at training camp. He played that way at preseason. But Dan Bylsma had said that there were just little things in the game where what he had seen in training camp wasn't showing up on the ice. And so he wanted to give Shane Wright an opportunity to reset, look at the game, from a distance, focus on some things, and he has been fantastic. I mentioned the Kraken power play. Again, we'll talk about it, but the power play, still not great, mostly because of what happened before Shane Wright came back from that reset. He has been phenomenal for us on the power play. Just recently scored a power play goal. I was at that game at MSG on Sunday against the Rangers. So Shane Wright, his storyline is not prototypical for a 4th overall pick, and certainly not as someone who was projected at some points to go number 1 overall. But I do think that his landing spot with Seattle and the way that Seattle has handled his development so far has been very responsible. And Shane, we're seeing the fruits of that right now with Shane Wright.
Yeah, and for the Kraken, which still has a little bit of a scoring depth issue for them. Like I mentioned, Jordan Eberle on IR. I mean,
Yeah.
Jared McCann, former Panther, although he's leading the Kraken again in points,
Yep.
It's still hope to see that the kids develop. And thankfully for the Kraken, Matty Beniers has had a bounce back season and is on pace to pass last year's total after a little bit of a sophomore slump for him.
Yeah, Beniers is an interesting story as well because he's not unlike most, unfortunately, of the Seattle Kraken players on the team where things weren't really clicking right away offensively. And I think you can chalk that up to a lot of things. You mentioned Brandon Montour and Chandler Stevenson coming in. So there's new key elements that we're bringing in. Obviously Stevenson at center and Brandon Montour as a defenseman. And actually Brandon Montour, his role early on was a little bit maybe different than he planned, or especially than what Vince Dunn planned, because Dunn was out for an extended period of time as well. So Brandon Montour has been really great. He hasn't scored in the last 5 games. We haven't seen him score a goal. However, he has been a huge impact setting things up, just like Vince Dunn. Now the two of them back, heavy shot from the blue line that can hit that target. Maybe you get a tap in, and a deflection with bodies in front, or just again, someone that can drive that puck deep and give the Seattle Kraken an opportunity. But with Beniers, I wouldn't be surprised. I think he is in a good place, to your point, Armando. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see maybe a little bit of a reset for Beniers as well. And again, I don't get the sense that when we see these healthy scratches, it's not always like a punishment, although I do think Bylsma has used it as such, or kind of like a wake-up call. Oliver Bjorkstrand has been a healthy scratch. Daniel Sprong's been the odd man out after coming back to the Seattle Kraken from Vancouver earlier this year, and his coming to the lineup was a little bit of a wake-up call for the offense. But Beniers, I think, I would have said he needed a reset, but if he continues to have Yanni Gourde on one of his flanks, because Yanni has been one of our centermen, I like what Yanni does for Beniers and his game when they're together. They can split responsibilities when it comes to kind of having more of a centerman mentality, but also Yanni Gourde is... he's a pepper pot, is what John Forsland calls him. And he can do a little bit of more of that, gritty, grimy kind of play and free Matty Beniers up to be more of a true scorer. So I'm very curious to see if we continue to see Gourde on his line. Maybe he doesn't need the reset. That, in effect, is the reset. But if not, I think giving Beniers just a few days off, because he has been working really hard for us at center. The face-off percentage has been much better for the Seattle Kraken. Stevenson certainly helps that. But, I think it's going to be interesting to see, like you said, how these young players develop. But they're getting time. We talked about Wright. We talked about Beniers, but you also have Ty Cartier. Riker Evans has been phenomenal at defense for the Seattle Kraken. So it's a really nice blend, and it just helps that Bylsma and Campbell, who you mentioned earlier, both came up from the AHL and our Firebirds team and are with some of these players as they make their transition to significant minutes in the NHL.
Yeah, and very excited for these young kids to take that next step with veterans helping them out. But let's transition over to segment number 2, where we'll continue this discussion on this matchup tonight between the Florida Panthers and the Seattle Kraken, right before Erica tells you all about our sponsors.
Today's crossover episode of Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. If you love sports, you're going to love PrizePicks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, of course it's hockey, or football, or any of your other favorite sports, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in on the action. So here's why you need to get started today. You can win up to 200 times your money on PrizePicks. Get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. No need to win. The $50 is guaranteed. PrizePicks also offers fun weekly promos like Daccord Tuesday, where select players' projections are discounted up to 25%. And listen, PrizePicks, you can show the Kraken some love. We won't be mad at you, but we definitely have some PrizePicks projections for today when it comes to the Panthers. So, I mean, what do you think about this? Are you taking the more or less on Sam Bennett scoring 0.5 points, Armando?
I would say so with how hot he's been and in a contract year. And he's playing on the same line with Matthew Tkachuk, so why not?
Okay, definitely taking the more on that. You heard it here first, folks. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly. PrizePicks, run your game. Thanks as always for making the Locked On Podcast Network, but especially our Locked On NHL shows a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken, joined by Armando Velez, your host of Locked On Florida Panthers. And we talked a little bit about the state of the franchise, Armando, in the first segment. Now let's get into the Superpower versus the Kryptonite. What are some of the things working really well for the Panthers as they look to repeat, and what are some of the areas that still need refinement?
The Panthers have 7 shorthanded goals this season. It's incredible how the guys like Sam Reinhart, Alexander Barkov, Lundell Luosterainen, even guys at times, Jesper Boquist and AJ Greer, have just inserted into the lineup for them, and also guys like Tomas Nosek for the Panthers. And just how those forwards have just been overwhelming the opposition on their power play with not being out of position, not chasing checks when the opposition is cycling the puck, which the Panthers defensively, whether it's penalty kill or 5-on-5, when they force the opposition to cycle the puck, that's when the Panthers defensively are able to be relaxed more. Even though you can't relax when you're in your own end, they seem more relaxed versus if they're being too aggressive with their pinches and then it's ending up in a rush the other way. For them, the Panthers are at their best defensively when they are forcing the opposition to get in on the cycle for them. And that leads into the weakness for the Panthers and just for them, 5-on-5 defense for them. Goaltending has been an issue from time to time. Sergei Bobrovsky, like I mentioned earlier, the dad bump, hopefully, after getting a win on Saturday against the San Jose Sharks, which Mackenzie Blackwood on the other end left a lasting impression in San Jose right before getting traded to Colorado. So crazy to think how a game against the Stanley Cup champions can really up your stock there, even though Mackenzie Blackwood played really well in New Jersey prior to that. But for the Panthers, 5-on-5 defense has just been it's been up and down for them, and they've been in some of these close games like 2-1, 3-2 at least a week and a half ago. But for them, it's just really about the 5-on-5 play for them and just getting their game right in that part for them, because the truth is, with losing Brandon Montour, they only have three top four defensemen. They're still trying to possibly look for that other top four guy, maybe a right-handed shot that they'll probably go for at the trade deadline on March 7th for them. So still trying to figure things out. There's been a mix of that second pair. Nico Mikkola has had a different partner. Has been shifting for the last week and a half. So the Panthers, they've been reluctant in switching the D pairs, but over the last few weeks, they've been experimenting more with those combos. Yeah,
that's interesting that you talk about defense on 5-on-5 play, because I was looking at, some of the stats coming in, and you talk about, goals for and goals against for the Panthers. I think, that the offense is obviously there. You talked also about the shorthanded goals. I'll get into what I think about that from the Kraken perspective, but the goals against, and it seems like, again, goaltending is just maybe a little piece of that, but also just the disciplined 5-on-5. And I have to say that's always something that I talk about with the Seattle Kraken, regardless of who's on the roster. But for this team specifically, Superpower, I'm going to say right now, and I already kind of mentioned this, is the right line. Ellie Tolvanen, Shane Wright, and Oliver Bjorkstrand. They are communicating well on the ice. They're getting creative. There was this great little chip play. Oliver Bjorkstrand coming into the neutral zone, chips it off the wall. Then Ellie Tolvanen gets it, center ice, gets into the offensive zone, and they find Shane Wright right in front of the net. They're getting to the net front. They're creating opportunities and screens. They do a great job cycling and replacing each other, what you would call like a weave in basketball. They do that effectively in their own zone, and they really are a boost. They are a boost also, especially Shane Wright on the power play. Now, as far as the Kryptonite, the power play has not been great. I'm going to put on the screen for those watching on YouTube just what we're looking at here. The power play for the Seattle Kraken, 18.2% clip, Armando, comparative to a 28% clip for the Florida Panthers. Similarly, on the penalty kill, advantage to the Stanley Cup champions there at an 81.2% clip, 78.3% for the Seattle Kraken. You also mentioned goaltending. I think it's going to be interesting because Joey Daccord did not play against the New York Rangers, had an illness, and he was listed as out ahead of today's games in the notes that the Seattle Kraken sent out on Monday. So if Joey Daccord cannot go, what I'm expecting is that we will see a high-scoring affair. We had to win a 7-5 game against the Rangers to get that W. Over the history of Philip Grubauer with the Seattle Kraken have not given him goal support. I can't tell you why. I've talked about it. I talk about it every week since the beginning of time of this show. And this season in particular, you're just finding, I'm not going to talk about them pregame, although I don't think the Florida Panthers probably have this, at least not the Locked On Kraken show on their scout, maybe your show. But there are specific areas that you're starting to see teams expose for Philip Grubauer. And I wouldn't be surprised, I'll just put it this way, if the Florida Panthers shoot high and quite literally into either the neck or the shoulder of Philip Grubauer. I know I said I wasn't going to do it, but I couldn't help myself. I mean, it's just so obvious. It's so noticeable. Mm-hmm. And if Joey Daccord is out with an illness, Philip Grubauer, but specifically the defense in all three zones is really going to have to sharpen up. And this is a great test, quite honestly, against the Panthers to see if they can do that.
Yeah, so Brandon Montour, a big part of that power play unit for the Seattle Kraken, getting 6 out of his 19 points on the power play, even a natural hat trick against the Montreal Canadiens earlier this season. So I was really happy for him when he got that. And also the chances are him and the Panthers met up for some type of dinner to give him his ring, him and Josh Mahura as well for them. And just big congratulations to them. And then crazy, the Joey Daccord story of just, would he be the Canadian goaltender for Team Canada? But also the Swedish passport for him and everything. But hey, it's so crazy, the story of Joey Daccord, former Charlotte Checker, by the way, Joey Daccord, on everything for him. But for the Panthers, I feel like this will be really Superpower versus Kryptonite when it comes to their penalty kill versus the Seattle power play. But also with how hot the Panthers power play has been and the explosion in scoring, even in their loss against Pittsburgh, they've already gone up to top 5 in power play just like that in a matter of days. So crazy to think how one hot streak can really skew numbers for the Panthers.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, again, I think that the Kryptonite for the Seattle Kraken has just been the inconsistency. They're not a consistent team. They haven't been. They had a really good road stretch. Earlier in the year, we had a really good home stretch. So I'm hoping that we'll start to see some of that really come to fruition. I also do think that the Seattle Kraken, particularly because they feel that they haven't really given their most consistent game, I think probably that game against the Carolina Hurricanes to start the most recent road trip is probably the most complete game. But, they know that they have more left in the tank, and they don't want to regret not being able to showcase their best hockey. And so when they play a team like the Florida Panthers, they see them in the standings, see what they can do. They want to play and level up to that. Now, on the other side of that, the Seattle Kraken, not just this year, but historically, you have to make sure that you really have that internal compass and you're not just playing up or quote unquote down or thinking that you can play down on any opponent. You have to attack every game to get the win. And at times the mentality has seemed just a little off kilter for the Seattle Kraken. But let's talk about whether it's players or specific parts of the game. What do we think are the keys for our respective teams as they hit the ice later tonight at Climate Pledge Arena? Today's episode, as I mentioned at the top of the show, brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the National Football League, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started again with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and, of course, of us here at the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, hockey fans, thanks as always for joining us on Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Kraken. And it's a game day, Armando, the best day of the week. And it comes multiple times usually, and we love it. We're going to get some hockey tonight. The Seattle Kraken, as I mentioned, played in New York on Sunday. They did have some time. I know you mentioned Brandon Montour. Likely, we haven't seen anything on social media, at least at the time of this recording, but likely connecting with the Florida Panthers. I will say he did do some community events because tonight at Climate Pledge Arena at CPA, the Kraken Community Thread program will be honoring Indigenous culture and Indigenous Heritage Night. And of course, Brandon Montour, we talked about this, but his day with the Stanley Cup, right, Armando, going back home and being able to be with Six Nations. I mean, I know we talked about that. I'm sure you did as well, but I know you would know that Montour has always just really been connected with his community and really has a lot of pride in being able to be an Indigenous player and to carry that with him in his career.
Yeah, and also the lacrosse connection for him being a star lacrosse player, but then having to choose one of lacrosse or hockey. And of course, what's more marketable and what's more what gives you more in your pockets for your family and everything. So, but he's still very so much connected there for him and the Six Nations over there in Ontario for him. So extremely happy for him once again.
Yeah, so make sure you check out the Kraken community thread, and we'll actually have a bonus episode for today talking a little bit more about that. But let's get into the keys to the game. Now, we've already mentioned some players, things that are working for our teams, things that aren't working for our teams. But Armando, at least on Locked On Kraken, when we have guests, I like to toss out a hypothetical so we can get into how you're seeing your team, the Florida Panthers. So I'll give you this. You can answer however you'd like. But the Florida Panthers will win a road game against the Seattle Kraken tonight
if they allow the Jared McCann line and they stop the Shane Wright line. That's my key for them. If you allow the Jared McCann line to get going, you're not gonna have an issue. But you look at the top line for the Seattle Kraken and then the third line for Seattle. Shane Wright on the third, Matty Beniers on the first. So if you're able to stop those lines, you'll find a way to get up. But also, you mentioned Shane Wright being the best line for them. Him, Eli Tovinen, who another first round pick for the Nashville Predators, who got away from them. But also the Corsi percentage of that Shane Wright line, 55%. The shots for percentage, 58%. So they are getting pucks to the net for them. So for the Panthers, it's really about, I know this is a cliche statement in hockey, time and space for them. And I think that for the Panthers, if they're able to match up with that, and chances are you're going to see the Lundell line matched up with that Shane Wright line. I mean, the Seattle Kraken do have the last change, so they get to dictate the matchups. So really for the Panthers and getting the Shane Wright line to limit them, and allowing if you can allow the second line to beat you there, I think the Panthers will be very well okay with that for them. So it's really about stopping those centers in Matty Beniers and Shane Wright.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you also kind of call out the McCann line because, and that's with Stevenson. But I think that is really intuitive because Jared McCann, as you mentioned at the top of the show, leading in points, and he has been our leading scorer for the last 3 seasons here. But I feel like because of the accommodations that have needed to be made in other places, that he's almost getting lost in the sauce. And so I will counter you saying that you want the Panthers to expose that line by saying the Seattle Kraken will win against the Florida Panthers if they really start creating options for that Stevenson line along with McCann and opening up the ice. If they can really get something working, and we get McCann to what he kind of sometimes will bust through a little later in the season, so it's nothing to worry about. But again, we've just been so focused on getting Burakovsky going, so focused on getting Shane Wright going. So I really like that pick, and I will again take the counter on that. The Seattle Kraken will also win against the Florida Panthers if they play their transition game well. You've already talked about the shorthanded goals. The Seattle Kraken want to play fast. Dan Bylsma has charged them to play fast. He has tested them and really made them skate a lot in training camp, which I absolutely love. But sometimes what the Seattle Kraken don't realize is if you want to play fast, then you have to also be aggressive defensively. Not to the point where you talked about pinching and things like that earlier. You still have to be smart, but you also have to hunt the puck, not just when you are attacking, but also winning board battles, winning 50-50 pucks. And sometimes that's where you see the Seattle Kraken, the mentality kind of drift a little bit. And so if they can attack that part of the game, which will then it's like some people say your best defense is offense, and sometimes you gotta give that to the mentality of guys. Go get me the puck so then we can skate north. That's what I want, and that is a way of playing defense. I want to see them be very aggressive, win those board battles, really get the Panthers out wide, but then keep them there so we can transition. That's going to be critical for the Seattle Kraken in the game that they want to play offensively. But again, knowing that the Florida Panthers are also a very fast team, they can get out, they can make you pay for mistakes. Or again, just a slippage in your execution. So I really want to see the Seattle Kraken sharpen with their aggression. I actually got to ask Dan Bylsma about that on Sunday, and he said he likes the transition or the trajectory of playing that aggressive, we kind of strike first game. It's not perfect, but he's starting to see the team buy into that, because when that happens, when that's the foundational piece, it allows everything else to open up. That's why the power play has been getting better. That's why the Shane Wright line is so effective, because they're innovative, they're creative, but they're aggressive. That's why Yanni Gourde being on a line with Matty Beniers is so critical, because that's his game. It's always been his game, and he'll bring that to any line, any team, anytime. So that's what I want to see for the Seattle Kraken. But Armando, where can my listeners follow you and all of the amazing work that you're doing? You've had so many great guests on Locked On Florida Panthers, so I want to make sure they're tapped in. Where can we find you?
They can follow me on X at MondoMan12 and Blue Sky at MondoMan12. They can follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers, and on Blue Sky at LOFLA Panthers, no underscore there. And they can also follow the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. How about you?
And same for us. Of course, you can find us on YouTube. That's where we're doing most of our work now, as we kind of figure out the new social media landscape. But Locked On Kraken also has an IG page, Instagram, as well as Twitter or X. So you can follow the show there. You can also follow me at Black Rosie Media on all of the platforms, including Blue Sky. We're over there. So usually using Blue Sky on a game day like today to give my thoughts on the game before, of course, then recording another episode of Locked On Kraken. But for Armando Velez and host of your Locked On Florida Panthers show, again, my name, Erica L. Ayala. Our two teams hit the ice. Brandon Montour going to go up against his former team. I'm sure, as you said, there will be a celebration at some point to honor his contributions as well as Josh Mahuro's contributions to that Stanley Cup championship. And hey, we'll see what happens. You'll just have to tune in to the next episode of Locked On Florida Panthers and, of course, Locked On Kraken. Until then, have a great day. Enjoy the game and be kind to yourself. Be kind to others. Peace out, everybody.